These are my video notes for my annotated notes. So, concern for humanization leads at once to the recognition of dehumanization. Dehumanization not only marks those who have lost humanity, but those who stole it. True generosity consists precisely in fighting to destroy the causes which nourish false charity. False charity constrains the fearful and the subdued to extend their hands. The oppressed do not see the new man/woman for them become oppressors. Basic element of relationships between oppressor and oppressed is prescription. To abolish oppression, you must critically recognize why you create a new situation. How can the oppressed participate in the developing the pedagogy of their liberation? Pedagogy of the oppressed is an instrument for their critical their professors or oppressor are a manifestation of dehumanization. Oppression and domesticating. Real oppression, more oppressive still by adding to it the real location of oppression corresponds to the dialectical relation between the subjective and objective. The oppressed must be their own example in the struggle for their redemption. If implementation of a liberating education requires political power and the oppressed have none, then how is it possible to carry out the pedagogy of the oppressed prior to the revolution? Only the oppressed who, by fearing themselves, can free the oppressor. When a new regime hardens into a dominating, I'm not sure what that says, the human dimension of the struggle is lost and it is no longer possible to speak of liberation. Another issue at inaudible and opportune arises the fact that certain numbers of the oppressor class join the oppressed in their struggle for liberation, thus moving from one pole of the contradiction to the other. The peasant begins to get courage to overcome his dependence when he realizes that he is dependent. Until then, he goes along with the boss and says, "What can I do? I am only a peasant." The oppressed feel an irresistible affiliation towards the oppressors and their way of life. Self-deprecating is another characteristic of life of the oppressed. So often they hear that they are not good enough to do anything and incapable of learning anything. They tend to be considered they are unwilling and useless. Political action on the side of the oppressed must be pedagogical action in the authentic sense of the word. Therefore, with the oppressed, those who work for liberation must not take advantage of the emotional dependence of the oppressed. The oppressed must reach this concentration as subjects, not as objects. It is essential for the oppressed to realize that when they accept the struggle for humanization, they also accept from that moment that their responsibility for the struggle. A revolutionary leadership must accordingly practice co-international education. Education thus becomes an act of deposing in which students as the depositors and teachers students as the depositees and the teachers as depositors. In the banking concept, the education knowledge is a gift bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable, those whom they consider to know nothing. The banking approach to adult education, for example, will never propose to students and they critically consider reality. Implicit in the banking concept is the assumption of a dichotomy between human beings and the world. A person is nearby in the world, not with the world or with others. The individual is the spectator, not the creator. Yet only through communication can human life hold meaning. The teacher thinking is authenticated by the authenticity of the student's thinking. The teachers cannot think for their students, nor can they impose their thought on them. Education as the exercise of domination stimulates the creativity of students with the ideological intent of indoctrinating them to adapt to the world of oppression. Those truly committed to liberation must reject the banking concept in its entirety, adopting a concept of women and men as conscious begins in consciousness as consciousness intent or intent upon the world. The banking concept distinguishes two stages into the action of the educator. The problem posing method does dichotomous of the activity of the teacher student. She is not coincide at the one point and narrative at another. She is always cognitive, whether preparing a project or engaging in a dialogue with the students. As women and men simultaneously reflecting on themselves, act on the world, increase the scope of their perception, they begin to direct their observations towards previously inconspicuous phenomenon. In problem-posing education, people will develop their power to prescribe critically the way that they exist in the world with them and in which they find themselves. Problem-posing education affirms men and women as beings in the process of becoming education. In this constantly remote in the praxis. In order to be, it must become. A departed consciousness of their situation leads people to apprehend the situation as a historical reality, justifiable of transformation. Human existence cannot be silent, nor can it be nourished by false words, but only by true words with which men and women transform because dialogue is an encounter among women and men in the name of the world. It must not be a situation whereas some name on behalf of others. Dialogue cannot exist without humility. Dialogue further requires an intense faith in mankind, faith in their power to make and remake to create and recreate, faith in their vocation more fully humans. True dialogue cannot exist unless the dialogues engage in critical thinking. For truly humanist educator is authentic revolutionary. The object of an action is the reality to be transformed by them together with other peoples, not other than men and women themselves. Educators and politicians speak and are not understood because their language is not attend to the concrete situation of the people they address. Their talk is just alienated and alienating rhetoric. The prop world of animals contains no limit situations due to ahistorical character. Only products that result from activity but do not belong to its physical body can give dimension of meaning to the context, which thus becomes a world. Limit situations imply the existence of persons who are negated and incurred by them. Within smaller circles, we find themes and limit situations, characteristics of societies, which through there are and limit situations share historical similarities. In stages of decoding, people exercise their view of the world. Meaningful theatrics is expressed by people in a given amount of expression will differ from a earlier amount if they have charged their perception of life of the objective facts to which the themes refer. Just as the educator may not elaborate a program to be present to the people, neither may the investigator elaborate I'm not sure what that says, for researching the thematic universe starting from points which he predetermined. After each observation visit, the investigator should draw up a brief report to be discussed by the entire team in order to evaluate the humility findings of both the professional investigators and local assistants. In order to offer various possibilities of analysis in the decoding process, the codifications should be organized as thematic fan, and decoding participants externalize their thematics and thereby make explicit their real consciousness of the world. The great achievement of Gabriel Bode is that by means of the dialecticals between essential and auxiliary codifications, he has managed to communicate to the participants a sense of totality. Once the decoding circle completes, the last stage begins. Investigators undertake a systematic interdisciplining stage of their findings. Once thematic dichotomy is complete, each specialist presents to the interdisciplinary team, a project of breakdown of the theme. During breakdown, the team will recognize the need to include some fundamental themes which we are not directly suggested by the people desired to the preceding investigation. Humans differ from animals. Animals do not consider the world they are immersed in it. Human beings emerge from the world objectively, and in doing so can understand it and transform it with their labor. Revolutionary praxis must oppose to the praxis of dominant elites, for they won by the nature. If revolutionary leaders who characterize a genuine humanism, they will be for a group of leaders who they try to carry out revolution. The earlier dialogue begins, the more likely revolutionary movement will take place. The revolution is made neither by the leaders for the people nor by the people for the leaders, but by both acting together in unshakable solidarity. Domination by its very nature requires only a dominant pole and dominated pole in antithetical contradiction. Revolutionary liberation, which attempts to resolve this contradiction, implies the existence of not only these poles but also of leadership group which emerges during this attempt. Science and humanist revolutionary leaders, on the other hand, cannot believe in the myth of ignorance of people. The revolution is born as a social entity with the oppressor society is the extent that it is a cultural action, and it cannot fail to correspond to the potential of the social entity in which it is organized with. Dialogue with the people is neither a concession nor a gift, much less a tactic to be used for domination. Because liberating action is dialogue in nature, dialogue cannot be posterior to that action but must be consistent with it. It is necessary for the operators to approach the people in order subjugation to keep them passive. All the actions of the dominant class manifest its need to divide in order to facilitate the preservation of the oppressor's state. The oppressed know from experience the price of not accepting invitation offered with the purpose of provincial their unity as a class. Manipulation is another dimension of the theory, an anti-dialogical action, and the strategy of division is an instrument of conquest. Since it's necessary to divide people in order to preserve the status quo and thereby the power of the dominators, it is essential for the oppressor to keep the oppressed from perceiving their strategy. In this historical phase, manipulation becomes a fundamental instrument for the preservation of domination. Through manipulation, the dominant elites can lead the people into an unauthentic type of organization and can thus avoid the threatening alternative. Since the populist leader simply manipulates instead of fighting for authentic popular organization, this type of leader just serves the revolution little of at all. Any populist leader who moves towards the people in any way other than as the intermediating of the oligarchies will be curbed by the latter. Cultural invasion is on the one hand an instrument of domination and on the other the result of domination. Parent-child relationship is in the home usually reflects the objective cultural conditions of the surrounding social structure. The fear of freedom is greater still in professionals who have not yet discovered for themselves the nature of their action and who are told that their action is dehumanizing. Cultural revolution takes the total society to be reconstructed, including all human activities, as an object of remolding action. This reclamation requires that the revolutionary leaders progressing from what was previously dialogical action imitate the cultural revolution. Cultural revolution develops the practice of permanent dialogue between leaders and people and consolidates the participation of people in power. Cultural invasion further signifies that the ultimate seat of decision regarding the action of those who are invaded lies not with those but with the invaders. The principal contradiction of dual societies is the relationship of dependency between them and the metropolitan society. The leaders who have emerged themselves necessarily reflect the contradiction of the dominant elites communicated to them by the oppressed, who may not yet, however, clearly perceive truth of own state of oppression or critically recognize the relationships of the antagonism to the oppressors. The role of evolutionary leadership is to consider seriously, even as they act, the reasons for any attitude of mistrust on the part of the people, as to seek on true avenues of communication with them, ways of helping the people to help themselves critically perceive the reality which oppresses them. The commitment of the revolutionary leaders is to the oppressed, at the same time a commitment to the freedom. Although entrusted is a basic dialogue, it is not a prior condition of the latter. It results from the encounter in which the person's co-subjects in decreasing the world as parts of the world's transformation. In dialogical theory, at no stage can revolutionary action forego communication with the people. The revolution loves and creates life, and in order to create life, it may be obliged to prevent some men from circumscribe evil life. To divide the oppressed, and ideology of oppression is indispensable. Domination itself is objectively divisible. Men who are bowed to nature and to the oppressor in this way must come to discern themselves as persons prevented from being. In order for the oppressed to unite, they must cut off all past ideologies. The fact that the leaders who organize the people do not have the right to arbitrarily impose their word does not mean that they must therefore take a liberalist position, which would encourage license among people. In cultural invasion, both the spectators and the reality to be preserved objects of the actors' actions. Those who are invaded, whatever their level, rarely go beyond the models which invaders prescribe for them. Revolutionary leaders must avoid organizing themselves apart from the people. Whatever contradiction to the people may occur fortuitously due to the certain historical conditions must be solved, not augmented by the cultural invasion, but of an imposed relationship.